Hey everybody, mel0n here. Welcome back to another video. Today I'm very excited to talk about a really unique product that I had the opportunity to test out, and I'm very grateful to the company for sending this out because they were actually exceptionally accommodating to get me a review unit, so thank you very much to them. But we are going to be talking today about the NPET Tech SpeedM, the Resin Speed mousepad. Now this mousepad I really didn't know a lot about. I knew it existed, but it's much more popular over in China, Japan, Korea. However, over here in NA, this pad is really not that well known. And I thought, you know what, this is a very unique pad. I have to try this pad out and see if it actually has unique enough performance to stand out from a lot of the other speed pads on the market. I've tested this pad for about 5 weeks, and I really do have to say this pad does offer some of the craziest performance and the most unique performance I think I've ever seen on a pad like this. It's a really cool product, and it's definitely really slept on. So today we're going to talk all about the NPET SpeedM, talk about why it's so unique, a couple little things of what you have to do to make this pad work the best for you, and why this pad may actually be your next main pad. Now, quick disclaimer, NPET Tech did send this unit out to me, as I said before, so thank you very much to them. They were extremely accommodating in sending this out, so thank you very much to them. This review would not have been possible without them doing so. And as always, I will have timestamps down in the description for you guys. But let's get right into it and talk about why the NPET Tech SpeedM is such a unique mousepad and a couple of its features. There are two sizes available. So there is a medium, which is 360mm by 300mm, 3mm thick, and that is available for $38.99 USD. And there is a large version, which is the one I have here, which is 450mm by 400 by 3mm, and it's available for around $44.99 USD. It is available in a bunch of colors. We have pink here. It also comes with orange, blue, gray, black, and there's a bunch of animated designs as well. This pad does also come with probably the most overkill packaging I think I've ever seen. It has more packaging than my Surpass can and my Skypad did, which is kind of funny, but given the surface, I do understand that because this resin surface is highly susceptible to creasing. Mine came pretty much slabbed between two pieces of cardboard with a bunch of tape wrapped around it, and then it had a bubble wrapper around that, and then it had like 2 to 3 layers of like shipping envelopes over that. And this is a big pad. This is the 450mm by 400. It's a lot of packaging. I definitely understand why they're doing it, because again, they don't want the pad to become damaged, and my pad wasn't damaged. It came perfectly fine out of the box, but I will admit the packaging is a little overkill. Now, in terms of the overall build quality of the SpeedM, and I was a little worried because the SpeedM is basically just a sandwich of layers because it's resin, foam, and then the base. So I was a little worried about this tri-layer design having some potential problems, but overall the pad's build quality is actually surprisingly good. The only potential issue I had on my SpeedM is that on the base layer, I did notice that here, and here, there was a little bit of air bubbling between the base layer and the actual foam layer. This, to me, is just purely cosmetic. It hasn't affected the actual performance of the pad. It's just some air that's got trapped in between the processing. If you get yourself a SpeedM and your SpeedM has those kinds of bubbling on the bottom, don't worry about it. It's not an actual issue that's going to affect the performance of the pad. It's just purely cosmetic. All right, so let's talk about the surface layer, because this resin surface layer is going to be what attract a lot of people to the SpeedM. So this surface layer is obviously, aside from being the selling point of the pad, the most unique part of this pad. So the actual surface texture on this pad is very interesting. It's almost like a semi-grainy, wrinkly kind of a texture. It's very interesting. It's unlike anything I've ever used on a pad before. When you run your hand across it, it does have a gritty feel to it, but it's a very shallow and almost kind of a soft grittiness, whereas a glass pad, you feel the abrasiveness of the glass texture. This is a little different. It feels like a softer glass pad, but wrinkly, if that makes sense, which is kind of odd. Now, of course, since it is softer, a lot of people did have concerns about consistency in the surface wearing over time. I will say, over my 5 weeks of testing across multiple different mice with a bunch of different skates and had different levels of usage, none of the surface layer has actually warped or caused any damage or worn out. It's actually stayed very consistent. This is going to be a pad you cannot use ceramic or glass skates on, because that will most likely damage the surface. But for PTFE and hardened PTFE, I had no problems. It worked completely fine. Now, another benefit to this unique texturing on the surface is that this pad is actually surprisingly resistant to cat hair. Normally on glass pads like my Skypad or my IKEA Glass, if I have anything on my pad, I feel it immediately through the skates. Whereas on this pad, I actually don't feel it nearly as much, arguably if ever. And of course, the surface, because it is resin, is completely waterproof, so you can pour water, whatever you want on this. It will not affect the surface at all. One of the downsides of having a resin surface is that this pad is extremely susceptible to heat. Don't put anything hot on this. If you have a hot coffee, don't put it on top of the pad, because there's a very good chance you can actually warp the surface. Don't leave it out in direct sunlight for too long, because that also could potentially warp the surface. And as I mentioned before, do not fold this pad. If you warp the pad or crease the pad, you cannot fix it. It is just gone. Depending on what kind of skates you're using, either be a dot skates or larger surface skates, there is a lot more feedback through the surface of this pad than there is on glass pads or soft pads. So if you are someone who is very sensitive to feedback from the mouse pad, keep that in mind. It's important to note that this this pad surface will not track properly on any mouse sensor below a 3360. So if you do plan on getting the SpeedM, be sure to check what kind of sensor your mouse is using ahead of time to make sure it'll be compatible. Now, in terms of the actual performance of this pad, this is the fastest pad I have ever touched. This pad is faster than my IKEA Glass and my Skypad 3.0 across a lot of skates. It is just fast. Playing on, let's say, like 80 centimeter on the SpeedM, it's almost identical to playing 33 centimeter on another pad. This surface is entirely speed. I would say, like, out of 100, I would say maybe 1 to 2% of that is control. The rest of it is pure speed, meaning that your experience in terms of control on this mouse pad are going to be entirely dependent on what kind of skates you're using. Some mouse skates, like the X-Ray Pad Jades, felt insanely fast with like borderline frictionless and were pretty much uncontrollable despite this being a heavier mouse, whereas other skates like the ones on my X2 V2 here felt a lot more controlled. So there's going to be a lot of variance in terms of this, because depending on your centimeter 360 combo and your skate combo, this pad is either going to be unusable or fantastic. You will need to adjust your centimeter per 60 depending on what kind of skates you're using. You're going to have to adjust your centimeter per 360 no matter what, but it is going to matter a little more or a little less depending on what kind of skates you're using. What I kind of found is that if you're using dot skates, you are going to have to go, because I played at 33 centimeter per 360, I had to go to around 70 to 80 centimeter per 360 on dots, and on standard larger surface contact area skates, it was more in the 60-55 range. I would recommend against getting the smaller version of the SpeedM, because even on the full size 450 by 400 version of the SpeedM, I'm still running into situations where I'm almost running out of mouse space. So I would highly recommend getting the full size version, because while you think you may not need to put your centimeter per 360 that high, depending on your skates and the material and what they're made of and the overall surface area, then the weight of your mouse and all that kind of stuff there, you may have to go that high. Now, in terms of the actual game performance, what I found is that this pad is disgustingly good for tracking. This is one of the best tracking pads I've ever used, because there's no friction from the surface. You can have a borderline frictionless tracking experience because the pad is not going to fight your movements like other pads are going to. It's just a smooth experience. I felt like tracking performance for me on the X2 V2 and the Death Adder V3 was like a sweet spot around the 60-55 centimeter range, but of course your experience may vary. One problem with this lack of control that makes tracking performance so great is that it does kind of nuke the static performance, because there's no stopping from the surface of the pad to stop your movement. So I was either undershooting or overshooting targets depending on what I was using. I found that in order to be remotely consistent on static performance, I had to jump my dot skate sensitivity all the way up to like 80 centimeter per 360. That's way higher than I'm comfortable playing on, which is why I end up going for the skates with the larger surface area with the more control and aiming for around a more balanced sensitivity range of around 60 centimeter per 360. The pad is completely usable for static performance, and especially if you are a very high centimeter per 360 player in the 70 to 80, 90 range, this pad will be great in terms of that. But if you are a lower centimeter player, anything below, I would say 45 centimeter, you will most likely need to adjust your sensitivity heavily to account for the speed on the SpeedM, just because there is going to be a huge difference. But playing Soldier 76 on this pad felt like I was cheating to a degree, because it was just so smooth. Of course, once you go higher in the centimeter ranges, you will have more feedback from the pad, but around 60 centimeter per 360 on the X2 V2 and Death Adder V3 stock skates kind of felt like the best for me. So that was what I settled for. And of course, if you're primarily only playing for tracking, you can go lower. If you're playing for static, you can go higher. There'll just be some variance to that, but overall you will need to heavily adjust your sensitivity depending on your skates and what you're normally using. This is probably the best base I've actually used this entire year across all the pads. I love the base on this one. Now, I will say it says it's a pour-on base in some parts of the marketing, others says it's just a non-slip base and doesn't say what it's made of. I don't really care what it's made of. I don't think it's pour-on. I think it's a pour-on-like substance, but it still works insanely well. The base is actually not particularly sticky to the hand at all. It actually, you can just kind of glide your hands over it quite well, but the pad actually adheres to surfaces really well. So if you just kind of lay it there and just kind of run your hands over it, this pad is anchored insanely well. Like I'm like pushed, like you can see my camera shaking with how much I'm pushing this thing. This thing ain't going anywhere. I actually couldn't really do a lot of really heavy force testing on them because I was pushing so hard. I was actually afraid of warping the sides because of how good the base grip was. You can put water on your desk to increase the adhesion strength if you want to. I didn't really even feel like that was necessary because the base grip by itself just performed so well. During my testing for about 5 weeks, I was taking the pad off, putting it back down, taking the pad off, putting it back down. I wasn't cleaning the base and I had no problems with the adhesion at any way, shape, or form. If you need to wash the base of your pad, you can just take some cold water and run it underneath there and just let it air dry. Do not use a microfiber cloth or a towel or a hair dryer to dry it off. Just let it dry off overnight. Overall, the base is actually incredibly solid. I'm very happy with it. It's easily the best base I've used this year. So regardless of what it's made of, I'm actually very happy with the performance. So the edges are flat 90-degree edges, but you can probably see here up on the top resin layer, there is a little bit of curving up at the top there. So while the edges are slightly bent on the top resin layer, even though this pad is relatively thin because it's only 3 millimeters thick, this edging here here does really still cause a lot of abrasiveness against skin just because it's resin, and while it is curved a little bit, it is still a lot more abrasive than a material like glass would be, or like a fabric layer on a stitched edge on a mouse pad. So this is going to be a pad where you're going to need to use an arm sleeve. I primarily use the focus sleeve and I felt it performed very well in this one, but pretty much any arm sleeve on the market is going to work completely fine. As long as the arm sleeve performs well on glass, it's going to perform very similarly on this pad. Now, in terms of skate wear, I would put this pad closer to the glass pad side of the spectrum because it is a harder surface, so the wear is obviously going to be faster than that on a soft pad. This was kind of a hard thing for me to measure because I was switching between a bunch of different mice on a daily basis, so the wear wasn't really consistent. Overall, I would say you maybe have to change your skates maybe every 7 months instead of every 5 months. It's going to depend on your usage. Softer PTFE is going to wear a lot faster than hardened PTFE, but overall the skate wear wasn't that bad in my opinion. Now, I did want to talk about a couple things about these included dot skates. NPET did include these because it is a higher wear surface. They thought, okay, well, we'll include some skates to replace the user's skates in case they wear out, which is a great idea. Unfortunately, these skates just do leave a lot to be desired. So the main problem with them is that the base adhesion on them is really bad. Like, I had to force my hand to hold these down for them to adhere, and even with that, it still had a couple times where they'd pop off on the edge, which was really frustrating. On top of that, they are also softer PTFE, so they do wear a little faster. And then on top of all of that, this packaging, I think this is Chinese, these skates actually have a covering on them, and I almost pulled a short circuit and said that these skates were the worst skates I've ever used because I didn't know these had a very, very, very thin protective film over them. So it turns out if you Google translate this, it actually does say, please remove protective film. I just thought this was Chinese for mouse skates or whatever. I didn't think it said that. It would be nice to have an English warning on it in the future just to prevent a lot of people from pulling a short circuit. If you do end up using these, make sure you take the protective coating off. You are much, much, much better off buying a third-party set of full-size skates for your mouse because dot skates have a lot of inconsistencies, especially on this faster pads, as we talked about before. Highly, highly recommend getting your own set of full-size skates for the best experience. So that is why I really do think a lot more people should be checking out the NPET SpeedM, because this pad does offer a very interesting performance caliber and a hybridization of a lot of different performance factors that I don't really think anything else on the market, at least to my knowledge, can match. So this is a very unique pad that can really perform exceptionally well if you give it time, and I really did enjoy my time on it, and I will definitely be keeping the NPET SpeedM in my rotation going forward because this is a really cool, unique aiming experience that I've really been enjoying. If you want to learn more about the NPET SpeedM, I will have their official product page and of course their Amazon store linked down in the description for you. You can check out additional information there. And huge thank you again to NPET Tech for making this review possible and being so accommodating and sending a review unit out to me even though they don't normally send them out to these areas. I greatly appreciate how accommodating they were and the chance they took on me to do the review. So thank you very much again to them. I greatly appreciate it. And of course, thank you to you for watching this video. I greatly appreciate it. If you'd like to see some other of my reviews, you can go ahead and check out my mousepad review playlist. But that is all for today. Thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Peace.